At a video cassette library in Khar to a national award-winning director, scriptwriter, and producer today. Not every day do we listen to such success stories, straight as they say, from the horse's mouth themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, Team Chaos is proud to present to you the man behind the success stories of Chandni Bar, Page 3, Traffic Signal, Fashion, Heroine, and I could go on and on and on. The face of realistic and hard-hitting cinema, Mr. Madhur Bhandarkar. Sorry, please have a seat. Thank you. I request Anjum from the Pronites team to kindly welcome Mr. Bhandarkar with a bouquet. Just start off immediately, sir, because we've been waiting for long for all of you and we have a lot of questions to ask you.
On behalf of the entire IIMA community, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Shashi Tharoor on this grand occasion. I would request our Professor Dheeraj Sharma to welcome our chief guest with a bouquet. So I would like to introduce our chief guest. Born in London in 1956, Shashi Tharoor was educated in India and the United States, completing a PhD in 1978 at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at the Tufts University. An author, politician, and a former international civil servant, Shashi Tharoor straddles several worlds of experience. Currently, a second-term Lok Sabha MP representing the Thiruvananthapuram constituency and the chairman of Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. He has previously served as Minister of State for Human Resource Development and Minister of State for External Affairs in the Government of India. During his 3-decade-long prior career at the United Nations, he served as peacekeeper, refugee worker, and administrator at the highest levels, serving as the Under-Secretary General for Communications and Public Information during Kofi Annan's leadership. His key responsibilities included peacekeeping after the Cold War and serving as senior advisor to the Secretary General in addition to his role as Under Secretary General. Dr. Tharoor is well-known award-winning writer, having authored 14 best-selling works of fiction and non-fiction since 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, Chaos 2015 brings you Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Let's welcome him with a big round of applause.
Seems to work. Is it audible? Good afternoon. First of all, sorry for keeping you all waiting. I must say that it was quite a day because I got up after 3.5 hours sleep to go off to Jaipur airport and found it completely fog-bound. And as you probably heard, my flight took off 4.5 hours later than scheduled. I've had to readjust my outgoing flight, but I've got one at 5:30, so it's not going to be, unfortunately, the kind of more relaxed time with all of you that we might have hoped for. But the plan is that I'll speak to you for about 15-20 minutes and take your questions and comments for the rest of the hour. And then I will have to flee fairly rapidly to get to the airport on time. Now, having said all of that, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. First of all, that IIM Ahmedabad actually has a festival called Chaos. Seemed to me slightly counterintuitive. Right? I mean, after all, you guys are studying to be managers, right? And the whole idea of a managed life is an orderly one. It's not one where you want to see chaos around you. And yet there's something about that, the creativity implied in chaos, the breaking of rules, the exploring and expanding of boundaries, that makes chaos a very attractive term for an intercollegiate graduate school festival event, as this is turning out to be. And it was interesting because, in the chaos of my having to change plans, having to change flights, having to change the appointments I'd already made for after landing in Delhi and so on, I get on this flight and who do you think comes on 2 paces behind me was Salman Khan, the actor. So he and I chatted the entire flight, which put paid to my plans to do some serious reading that I could impress you all with. But since I had to give you some gyan from my flight preparation, I want to tell you Salman Khan is actually a very interesting and thoughtful guy. And the hour and a quarter went very, very briskly. And one of the things that he talked to me about struck me as almost a perfect description of the chaos of life. Because he said basically life is like a game of snakes and ladders. I'm assuming you've all played snakes and ladders, right? So he says, imagine, he says, you know, you're throwing the dice, desperately hoping for that 6, and it never comes, and you keep trying and you keep trying and it never comes. And then the other chap or the other players all get way ahead of you. But then they race ahead and then they hit the snake. And you are sort of slowly chugging on, but you manage to overtake them. But then you get to 99, you just can't throw that 1 to get the 100. It was a fascinating explanation of the randomness, if you like, of the kind of opportunities that come in life. And yet, I then come straight from talking to Salman Khan, and I find Ashwin Sanghi waiting for me, and he's just spoken to you all today about the things you can do to ensure that you conquer chaos, that you actually get beyond that randomness. And what was interesting there was that when you think in terms of, I think, the fabulous title of his book, it struck me that the old line that I grew up with was, the harder I work, the luckier I get. So I said, is it only hard work you're talking about? He said, no, there are various other things. And he says he gave you a PowerPoint and talked you through it, so I won't repeat what he said. But the fact is, he said, you can train yourself to be lucky. And that too is an interesting thought, because if you go back to the Napoleonic Wars, it used to be said that in the heat and dust of those bloody campaigns, as people in the middle of the war had to be promoted to command positions and be made generals, when these names and their achievements were brought to Napoleon for a final decision, his key question always was, yes, he's done all this, he's won that battle, but is he lucky? Is he lucky was for him the ultimate yardstick. That, you know, other things being equal, if this guy is the one who manages that magic of breaking through, then he deserves the command position, because we need commanders who are lucky. In life, you need to be lucky, and I will not try and reproduce Ashwin's talk, particularly since I haven't heard it. But when we talk about chaos and we talk about trying to manage chaos, we are talking fundamentally about preparing ourselves for coping with the uncertainties and randomness that confront us in this world. Now, I'm told by young Ramachandran just a minute before I came on that the broad theme he was hoping you would all discuss today with me is youth and politics. And I had not actually prepared for that, but why not? It's an important issue. One of the questions that came across my mind was whether more and more young people, other than from certain specific predetermined categories, would be interested in coming into politics. The predetermined categories we all know, right? I mean, the nationalist generation, the heroes of our freedom struggle, they seem to get a permanent position for their descendants to get into politics. So if you're young and the grandson or great-grandson of a freedom fighter, you'll be in politics. Then what the Marxists call the lumpen proletariat, the people who really have nothing to lose, they came into politics because it was a means of self-advancement. But people like you, the people who studied for the IIM entrance examinations, the people who actually decided to pursue professions and professional skills and intellectual attainment, none of you tended to go into politics. I came from the same sort of background. I was inconveniently good at taking exams, and so my parents felt my sort of path was charted for me. Pass the exams, do well, go on to the next stage, pass the next lot of exams, go on until you finally meritocratically get yourself a good profession, and that will be your life. And that politics is merely the refuge of those who aren't good enough to pass those exams. That was the usual assumption. I'm very proud to say I have something in common with most of you here, which is that I actually got into IIM Ahmedabad. I managed to rank second in the admission list in 1975. There were only 2 IIMs in India. There were only 2 IIMs in India in those days. The other was Calcutta, and they ranked me first So had I stayed on, I would have gone there, I have to admit. Sheer miffed ego. But in the end, I didn't go to either because I decided to pursue graduate studies in international affairs in the US, and that changed my life without any great consciousness of what I was doing. Other than that, it would be fun to study abroad. Particularly for my generation, going abroad was a very big deal. Clutching the $8 that our government allowed us to take with us. And it was an amazing change of fortune from what I might have done if I'd come into the IIM in those days, when the principal opportunities awaiting you were to sell detergent for a Hindustanized multinational. Those were not the bottom lines that excited me in my life. I wanted to deal with ideas. I wanted to deal with policies. I wanted to deal with political issues, even if I couldn't be a politician. And I thought I couldn't be a politician because there never was one in my family. I had no particular political connections or political pedigree. But I could deal with political issues. I mean, politics is a sensitive subject to the Indian middle class. My mother still hates the fact that I'm in politics. She feels that it was a waste of my education. And I keep telling her, look, the entire point is we need more educated people in politics. Just now Ashwin was joking, Ashwin Sanghi, that the two compounds of which the word politics is made out of, poly means many, and ticks are blood-sucking insects. So is that what politics is all about? Now, that's the standard middle-class educated professional view of politics. And I wrote a few articles pointing out how different this is from politics in other democracies. Having lived so long of such a large part of my life in the West, I was struck by the fact that in the US, for example, politicians are treated practically as role models. To get elected, you have to be somebody who incarnates a certain ideal. You have the perfect, especially since 90% of politicians are male, the perfect wife, 2.3 children, the dog, the white picket fence, the green lawn, all of these. And the American middle class expects from their politicians a standard of behavior that they would not really demand of themselves. So these poor politicians will usually be people who've never had an extramarital affair, never had a divorce, never used a bad word, never told a bad joke, whatever, all of these things. That idealized perfection that is demanded by the professional middle class and by the media out of their political candidates. And you contrast that with India, where, as I said, in the West, they expect of politicians standards they wouldn't demand of themselves. In India, the middle class expects of politicians standards they wouldn't tolerate in themselves or their families or their neighbors. So you expect your politicians to be sleazy and venal and corrupt and unprincipled and capable of anything. Now, the fact is, if that happens, what kind of leadership does the country you're serving get? You're making your careers and your futures in a land led then by politicians you don't respect, led then by an entire class of leaders who ultimately you're not proud of and you feel you deserve better. Well, if you do, maybe the best argument is to actually get in some of you anyway, get into it yourselves. And to my mind, this makes sense. In the Western world, as I said, the middle class, the educated profession classes are the principal people involved in politics. They write the manifestos, they make the speeches, they get into the political parties, they are the candidates, and very often they are the people who've come out of places like the best universities with the best grades. In fact, something like 9 out of the last 12 presidential candidates were products of either Harvard or Yale, the two best universities in the United States, particularly in the liberal arts, law, and so on. Now, we don't have that equivalent in India. You don't have too many IIM and IIT products or St. Stephen's graduates getting into the political class. And I often ask myself this question, why? Why did this happen? At the time that I came into politics, took the plunge, I benefited, of course, from a certain amount of name recognition for what I had done in a world outside politics. And I was fortunate to be given an opportunity that very rarely does somebody not of appropriate political pedigree get. But when I actually won that election and came in, to government, I was very struck by the number of young people of your kind of background who would come up to me at airports, on planes, in railway stations, in movie theaters and say, gosh, we're so excited about what you've done. We want to do it too. How do we get into politics? And many of these are people who are in their late 20s, early 30s. They were in banking, they were in private equity, they were in law firms, but they wanted to make a difference, which is what got me into politics. I wanted to make a difference to my society, to my country. And when they came up to me, and I sort of gave them all the predictable answers. Hi, if you can just tone that down a bit because it's getting to be a bit distracting, your conversation there. Thanks. The fact is that if you can actually manage to get involved through a party that you believe in or a set of beliefs you share at the local level, that is, start off with, for example, in the very community in which you live, find out who the local political representatives are of the tendency that you lean towards, and work with them. Make it clear within a few days of contact that you have better things to do than stick posters or shout slogans in the streets, that you actually want to get involved in the kinds of issues, in the policy formulation, in studying the laws and problems, and coming up with recommendations, the kinds of things that your education equips you for. And from there, you would rapidly make yourself known up the party ladder and go on. Very few Indians tend to do that. They tend instead to use their connections, come in with people they know, come in with people at the top, and hope to benefit from a top-down approach. But most effective politics is actually from the bottom up. And that's why I urge people to do that. And many young people find that difficult. They find that difficult largely because they feel it's a huge risk, which it is. There is no guaranteed outcome. There's no certainty that you're going to get yourself an election ticket or whatever, or become even a local councillor or whatever, if you were to come into a local party organization. And so people hesitate. And you know, for many politicians, even this act of hesitation on the part of our educated young professionals sort of disqualifies you from attempting politics. There's a famous story of somebody going to Mozart. You all know the great composer Mozart, right? Mozart was a child genius. He was composing operas by the age of 6, and he was a prodigy who died with one of the greatest reputations in Western classical music, and died in his late 20s, early 30s. Now, the story goes that this guy, who was a young man in his, let's say, mid to late 20s, goes to Mozart and says, how do you write an opera? Can you guide me? How do I write an opera? And Mozart looks at him and says, show me what you've done. So he says, listen, you're a bit young still. Why don't you wait a few more years and try and write a ballad instead? And this fellow looks at him very offended and says, you're telling me I'm too young? You wrote your first opera when you were 6 years old. And Mozart replies, yes, but I didn't need to ask how. You see, and for many of these politicians, the same attitude applies. If you need to ask how, you need to find out, you need to be guided, you need to be mentored, you need to be promoted by others, then you're not fit to do what they did, which is they took the risks. They perhaps sometimes sacrificed their studies or their business activities or whatever to devote their energy and their time to the cause of the party they cared for, and therefore they've earned the hard way the right to do certain things in the political arena that you haven't earned because you've been sitting at IIM and getting yourself a degree. Now that's the kind of tough call that most professionals find it impossible to make. I would share, certainly if somebody had asked me when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, to give it all up and come into politics, I would have hesitated because you settle down into a certain career path, you develop certain professional aspirations, plus, of course, you start taking certain things for granted, a salary, a structure, a decent home, all of these things. And to jeopardize all that for the uncertainties of a career without a predictable income or a predictable career path or a predictable anything really is almost the definition of committing yourself to the kind of chaos that I talked about at the beginning of my remarks. And for those of you who study management, it seems to me you would prefer to have a life too that you can manage, just as you manage problems and find solutions in your professional outcomes. Now, I don't have an easy answer for you. Ultimately, every individual knows what makes them tick, what they want to do, and why they want to do it. But I do want to say that there's probably no better qualification for a political life than a good MBA degree. Because you understand how to diagnose problems. You understand how to come up with solutions, ideally solutions that have been tested elsewhere, that have worked, or solutions based on enough knowledge on your part of what has worked elsewhere that you can be fairly confident it'll work here. It involves, of course, accounting for assorted variables of uncertainty, including the human resources you're dealing with in implementing the solution you come up with. It involves dealing with organizations and often managing organizational change. And when you come out with a good, solidly based management degree, your mind and your temperament should actually be extremely well suited to the challenge of managing a political life and a political career. Now, I'm sure 90-odd% of you will not move in that direction. But for those of you who do, let me assure you, you'll do far better than sitting outside you might think you would. I think I've taken the 20 minutes that or 15 anyway, or 15 to 20, and I do want to leave enough time for an interaction with you on what's really on your mind. So let me end by saying there is one more thing that I do want to stress to all of you. You have grown up into an India and into a world in which the opportunities, the horizons are so much wider and vaster than what people of my generation could look forward to when we came of age. This is a country now which is plugged into immense possibilities. It's a much more globalized land. When I came, as I said, I graduated from college with 2 IIMs. There were very few job opportunities available after as well. The number of careers available in India were few and far between. The number of products that were manufactured or sold here were much fewer. The number of career tracks, the number of academic disciplines, everything. We were in a much more restricted, much more closed, much more protected world. You've come into a place where it seems to me the number of options are limitless. Indeed, there's pretty much nothing available anywhere in the world that you can't have access to, either here or by simply being able to go abroad far more easily than my generation could have. And in that world of possibilities, there's also tremendous opportunity. You must have heard about the demographic dividend that many politicians go on about. I was probably the first one guilty a few years ago in the UPA government of hammering on and on and on about the fact that all the numbers are stacked up in our favor. The old cliche is nothing succeeds like success, right? But in India's case, nothing succeeds like failure, because our failure to actually control our population means we have this tremendous demographic dividend, potentially. We have all of you. We have 51% of our population under 25. We have between 10 and 19, 225 million people. These are the ones who are going to be potentially going through college, university, and ready to start work in a decade's time. By 2020, we will actually have more people ready to start work, that is defined by the ILO, the International Labour Organization, as the ages between 20 and 24. We will actually have more people, 116 million, than China, which will only have 93 million. So we are poised to have all the advantages that for one generation before China had. Because we have the young people, China no longer does, and everywhere else is aging. Japan, the average age in 2020 will be 47. Europe will be 46. Even America, perennially youthful America with its renewal of itself through immigration and so on, America will be 40 average in 2020. We will be 29. And so we really have the opportunity to seize the world, to be the workhorse of the world, to be the source of dynamic human capital, whether it's services, whether it's labor, whether it's anything else that a country like China could provide before we can provide it now. Provided, of course, and that's where the catch is, the big catch, is we can educate, train, and equip this young generation to take advantage of what the world has to offer. Now, in a place like IIM, and there's no question that everybody sitting here is being prepared, if not already prepared, to seize the opportunities. And good luck to you, wonderful. But as you know, there are many, many others who are not so ready, who haven't had a fraction of the opportunity. And one of the purposes of being in politics is to try and steer policy and the implementation of policy in the direction of actually helping those who've been left out, the ones on the margins, the ones who've been excluded. I think this country has tremendous potential. But I'm also aware that in 165 of our 625 districts, we've had young men pick up the gun in Naxalite Maoist insurrections because they are either uneducated or undereducated. They're not just unemployed, they're unemployable, and they feel no stake in the future of our society or our economy because they have no place in it. And for them, a meal, 1,000 rupees and a Kalashnikov is just as good a way of responding to their lack of place in the system as any other. And if we've got to change that dynamic, we've got to make sure that we don't add to those numbers, that we actually give people the opportunity. And during the Q&A, if any of you is interested, I can go into more depth and more detail about how and what we should be doing. I believe the Prime Minister understands this. The challenge in India is not one of having the right diagnosis or the right ideas. It's having the right prescription and implementing it. And implementation has always been our national weakness. But if that happens, I believe we can seize the world. Already the world is changing. When I came out of college, pretty much everything you can think of, the number one was in America or was America. Today, it's hard, you'll be hard pressed to find too many examples of America being number one. Okay, you've got, where are the smartest executive jets being made in the world? Not by Boeing or Lockheed, but by Embraer of Brazil. Where's the tallest building in the world? It's neither the Empire State Building nor the Sears Tower in Chicago. It's a building in Dubai, the Burj Khalifa, which replaced a building in Taipei, which replaced a building in Malaysia, the Petronas Towers. So in other words, you're looking at other countries rising and overtaking all of these. The largest Ferris wheel in the world used to be in America, in Coney Island. Now it's in Singapore. The largest mall in the world was in Minnesota, the Mall of the Americas. Now it's in Beijing. Beijing has the largest mall in the world. So basically, everything is changing. And where are we number one, by the way? We do make more two-wheeler scooters than any country in the world. And of course, we import more gold than any country in the world. I think we can do better and get to number one in other areas. And I think it's up to you guys, your generation, as you come forward and seize the reins of this economy and this country. We can also rise as these others have done. It's a changing world. You're well placed to take advantage of it. I wish you luck, and I'm here very happy to answer your questions. Thanks very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, and I think I should not have told about the team because you have covered almost all the questions that we had. So the first question is, why did you join United Nations, and after that, why did you join Indian politics? Is it some ambition or goal that you had from childhood, or is it something just happened?
Yeah, well, but by the way, can I get another hot tea? Is there someone who can help me with that? I've got a bit of a throat. United Nations, very simply, what happened was that I had been brought up very much in this middle-class family, very conventional aspirations. And in those days, if you weren't interested in going into these Hindustanized multinationals I talked about, then the real option available to you was to sit the IAS and IFS exams. And I was always very curious about the world. I would read every nugget I could find about world news in the newspapers. There wasn't a lot of it, but I read what I could. And I thought I would join the Indian Foreign Service. But unfortunately, just about the time I was going off to graduate school in the States, the emergency was declared. I've written about this in my book, India from Midnight to the Millennium. And it was a deeply sobering and negative experience, knowing that all the cherished democratic freedoms we had taken for granted growing up in India could so easily be snatched away. And I just no longer felt like serving a government that could do this to our people. Now, it so happens, as you know, the emergency only lasted 22 months, and there was a restoration of democracy, which is, thank God, proved to be permanent. But for me, the feeling at that point was, I'm not going to take these exams. If it happened once, it could happen again. And so, where could I be involved in international affairs and international diplomacy? Clearly, the United Nations was the other possibility. And that's why I found myself going into that. Having said that, when I finished my 29 years at the United Nations with a defeat to Ban Ki-moon in the race for Secretary General, was a narrow defeat. As Groucho Marx would say, close but no cigar. I didn't get the cigar. I decided I should leave. He was very gracious and invited me to remain at the United Nations. But I felt that it would be the wrong thing to do, because having sought to defeat him, if I stayed on, anything I said could be misconstrued, could be seen as casting a shadow on his work. I just felt the right thing to do was a clean break. So I left, and I initially didn't immediately rush back to India. I kept coming every month or so, looking at possibilities here. Meanwhile, speaking and writing. Speaking is a very lucrative thing you can do if you're living in America. They pay very well for a speech. Obviously, at IIM Ahmedabad there is no payment, but I'm just saying that I could do this for a very comfortable living in the Western world. But comfort alone never really mattered to me, because very frankly, I hadn't been motivated by the bottom line. My UN career had always been accompanied by a sense of mission, sense of purpose. I worked for refugees. I worked in peacekeeping. I worked for the very great Secretary General Kofi Annan and the entire organization at a time when there was a feeling in my mind that we were making a difference and trying to make a difference for the world. And I wanted to continue making a difference. And so just looking at the figures at the bottom of my tax return were not exciting enough for me. And so when, to my own surprise, I started getting sounded out by the political parties here and offered a chance to contest, I didn't hesitate. I leapt at it. It really was, to me, not a difficult decision to make, even though I knew that there was far less possibility of success than I thought the race for the Secretary General of the UN had. Because there I was very supremely qualified and very well connected and had a very long career behind me, and I thought that if they wanted somebody who's already proved that he can do the job, I was there. They didn't, as it happened, but that's another matter. Here in politics, I was coming into a world which I had no personal experience of, without any political pedigree, no godfather to push me through, and indeed the active hostility and resentment of many of those who'd worked in this field and thought they should have had the ticket that was given to me. So it was a tough call, but I also knew that in a democracy, the only way you can make a real difference in terms of the policies that shape the lives of your countrymen and women is through politics. You can be very effective in your field and you'll make a great contribution to the country, don't get me wrong. If you're a good manager, a good accountant, a good engineer, a good whatever, you will make a difference. But the kind of difference that moves policies, that moves national discourse, that changes the direction of a country's foreign policy, etc., can only be done through getting into the political process. And that's why I decided it was worth making a bid for it and doing it the hard way. And I also felt that because I'd been out of the country so long, it was only by actually contesting and showing that I could win the support of the public in one constituency that I would earn the right to represent the people in politics and to speak on behalf of the Indian people, which I was then proud and able to do.
Thank you. And now that you've already answered these questions, but I have one more question on that. So generally, we say a lot of youth should enter politics, and I am seeing youth are less hesitant nowadays, and a lot of youth are entering into politics in different states. But still, I would say a seat for a particular constituency is allocated either based on the money the person is having, or maybe he should be a celebrity, or he or she should be a son or a daughter of a politician, or should have studied in Stanford or Harvard in good reputed institutions. So can you tell us how do they allocate generally a political party? How do they allocate a seat, or what do they look for so that the youth can understand, okay, this is what I need to do if I want to get into? Now it is vague or unclear.
I can't speak for the other parties because I don't know how they do their work, but I've seen what happens in the Congress party. So yes, there's certainly, if you look at the handful of people, there's a book by Patrick French called India, in which he's actually done a statistical analysis. It's on his website as well, that every single MP under 35 in India is a dynast, that is a son of a politician or the daughter of a politician. And of those MPs under 40, only one didn't come from a political family. So those numbers are very sobering. Do we get inspired by the one, or do we look at the others and say, well, then we have no chance? It's a tough call. The one was a woman called Meenakshi Natarajan, who is just a girl from a small town in Madhya Pradesh, who got into student politics, got in through the National Students' Union of India into the Youth Congress, impressed Rahul Gandhi with her passion, her commitment, her connect to people, her simplicity, and so she was offered a ticket. Was that luck? I mean, you can ask Ashwin Sanghi about bloody good luck, since that's what he talked to you about. But such opportunities do exist, and I believe they exist in other parties as well. But she had done the years of work that perhaps after an MBA you're less prepared to do. Many people who look at this and say, well, we're neither from a political family, nor have we done the hard yards in party grunge work, will we ever get a chance? It's a fair question, and the honest truth is, no one knows. You may be lucky, you may catch the eye of someone, or you may be prepared to do some of the grunge work. Now, for example, let's say you're from a city. A city, doesn't matter which one, take Ahmedabad, whatever. Your city has wards. Each ward has a councillor. The councillor sits in the municipal corporation, makes policies for the city. Now, that's something that an urban educated professional can probably do far better than many of the ordinary politicians. But to get there, you've got to get elected. One of the things you can start off by doing is, if the councillor is from your party, going up to him and saying, do you need any help? Can I help you with policy advice? Do you want me to do some research for you? I've studied this kind of issue which can be useful in understanding this particular problem. Can I come to you? That's one way of doing it. If the councillor is from a party you don't like, then you can be the voice of your party on the issues that politician isn't doing to your satisfaction. You can go to your local netas in this area saying, look, I haven't stuck the posters and shouted the slogans and done the dharnas, but I know something that I can help you with, and that I'm sympathetic to our party, to this party. I can work with you and make a suggestion. Now, I honestly think that most political leaders, is this audible? Yeah, I think that most political leaders, my God, I no longer have to shout, that most political leaders would be receptive to this kind of approach, would be willing to hear from you and say, sure, why don't you give us what you can? You can prove yourself that way. But unless you're already very, very well known, you have to realize that no one's going to give you a ticket as a gift. This is something that, just as when you have an MBA degree and you're applying for a job, there are 10 others of comparable qualifications also applying for a job. Similarly, when you're looking for a party ticket for an election, you have to understand you're competing with others for that ticket. And some of the others have demonstrated their suitability for it by their hard work, some by their genes, their family advantages, some perhaps by money, whatever. So you have to know what you're offering. If you're a young, middle-class, urban professional, what you're offering is your intellect, your training, your capacity to study, research, analyze issues, come up with solutions, perhaps your ability to articulate those solutions better than a less educated person can do. Try and use those to make yourself valuable to a political party.
Thank you. There are two reasons I feel because of which youth are hesitant to enter politics apart from this. One can be they need an economic engine to run their family. Unlike other profession, you are paid and you get a salary. But in this profession, yes, you are paid, but if you want to grow your family, it is difficult. So that is one reason. For that economic engine, if they use politics as economic engine, then they'll become a business. The second reason is it's an hostile environment, and the moment you enter, the privacy is less and a lot of other things come in. So how do you manage your personal life and political life, considering politicians as a whole, they have very less privacy? And how do you also manage stress while managing any controversy or any problems that you face?
Well, I've had more than my fair share of all of those problems, so I don't even want to suggest that my example should be used to anybody else, because I dearly wish upon you a life that is less stressed than mine has been in these areas. But very simply, privacy is the first thing that goes out of the window, particularly in your constituency. In my case, when I'm in Thiruvananthapuram, I've actually had people follow me to the bathroom with some urgent thing they wanted to tell me. There is no space. Your bedroom is not your own space. You can't sit and reflect or write. I mean, I'm somebody who's also a writer, and I need sometimes to just shut myself up with my computer and my material and reflect and write and put forward something. I can almost never do that in my constituency unless I'm doing it after 11 o'clock at night, when finally people go to sleep and I can sit down and work, which leads to very, very short hours of sleep time, I have to tell you. But that's what I end up doing in my constituency, and that is a real challenge. So privacy is out. Secondly, leading your own schedule. For example, when I came from America, I had gotten to this very American habit of going to the gym every morning wherever I was. I would travel with my gym shoes and myself. Forget it. I mean, in politics, from the moment that you're sort of barely able to open your eyes in the morning, there are people making demands of you. There is no question of saying, sorry, I'm going to the gym for the next hour. I mean, you won't get elected the next time around. That'll be the end of your political career. So it becomes difficult, because if you try and be yourself and try and be different from other politicians, then you're dismissed by the political class and by the voters as not being a serious enough politician. Maybe I'm also particularly speaking of the reality of Kerala, where our politicians have thoroughly spoiled the public by being always on call, always on demand, always available. But it's certainly a very, very demanding environment, and that it sucks a lot out of you. And the third thing is our current media environment. This is a very relatively recent phenomenon. It's come with 24/7 news television. Basically, we now have in India more all news, all the time channels than the rest of the democracies in the world put together. There are something like 380 all news 24/7 channels in our country in 23 languages. Which means, I mean, even in a relatively small state like Kerala, there are 13 all news channels. Okay, so I mean, basically wherever you go, there's some channel wanting to break your news. In other words, break your head in the process of breaking your news. And the problem with that is that the sort of TRP culture, trying to get the best rating points and trying to get more eyeballs, which is also necessary because most of them are losing money, and so the way they attract ads is by having more attention. That has begun to dominate the nature of professional media coverage, the nature of, in fact, I would call it unprofessional media coverage, because it's only what makes the headlines that matters, what actually gets people to watch that matters. It's no longer the old principles of journalism 101, separating fact from fiction or speculation, separating rumor and hearsay from reportage, separating verifiable, provable, demonstrable information from sheer guesswork, speculation, or very often direct lies. All of it is all mixed up together and is all fair game on TV. And the sad thing is, this has also infected the so-called mainstream print media, which knows that the readers who are picking up their newspaper in the morning have been watching and listening to this all the previous day on television, and therefore they feel obliged to match or compete with this kind of knowledge as well. So there's been a terrible dumbing down of our discourse. I believe it's done a great deal of harm to the quality of reasoned deliberation, to use Amartya Sen's phrase in The Argumentative Indian. He talked about democracy as a product of reasoned deliberation. There's neither reason nor deliberation in our mass media today, and that sadly is what politicians are confronting. If I joined politics a generation ago, I would never have had to face this. Those were the days when people didn't interfere in people's personal lives. Politicians, I mean, we even had a prime minister who lived in a ménage à trois with a man and his wife for years, and no one actually reported it. It was commonly talked about in Delhi, but no one reported it. Today, everything in people's personal lives, including their personal tragedies, their divorces, their marriages, whatever, are all fair game for the gossip columns. And it's become, I believe, a very sad thing to put up with. So the disincentives for getting into politics are very high. The fundraising for elections is another challenge. The venality, the petty motivations of many people. I was always startled whenever, I'll be very honest, I have to meet the public all the time as an MP. But if I announce a Meet the Public session intended for 1 hour, it usually takes a minimum of 3 hours. And in those 3 hours, about 250 to 300 people come, not 5 or 10 or 15. I remember a British MP coming to me saying, so do you conduct surgeries here? Surgeries are what the British call their Meet the Public sessions in their constituencies in England. And I said, yes. And he said, can you believe it, last Saturday I had 7 people coming. So I said, 7 people came, the same time? No, 7 people. I had 7 different appointments. I said, you have the luxury of giving appointments. I just announce an hour, and 250 or 300 turn up. Because I represent 2 million people, and that British MP was representing fewer than 1 lakh. And that too is part of the challenge. But anyway, and these people, 95% of them come for their personal work. That is, they want a job, a transfer, a promotion, a word to be put in so their daughter will get through an interview for something else, a university admission out of turn, a favor of one sort or the other, the MP to talk to the bank to get their bank loan waived or their interest reduced or whatever because they can't pay. I mean, it's almost entirely the notion which we built up assiduously over 6.5 decades that the state and the mechanisms of the state exist to serve your personal purpose, and the elected representative is your instrument to do that. I remember when I rather foolishly once early on in my political career said, but I can't do that, it's against the law. Somebody whispered to me, you should never say that. No politician in India says you can't do that. Say you will look into it. I'm told we have a very senior figure in Kerala who was approached by a constituent who said, I want you to write a letter to Bill Clinton introducing me. Bill Clinton happened to be the president at that time. And without batting an eyelid, the gentleman concerned, this very senior figure, said, okay, and he signed a letter to Bill Clinton, this is to introduce my constituent, Mr. Puttu Raja, who wants to come and meet you. He says, basically, it costs him nothing that Clinton may think, what kind of an idiot has signed this letter, but it gains him a lot because this fellow thinks, my representative was willing to write a letter to Clinton. And so he goes and, of course, he gets the vote again the next election. Now, this kind of thing can sometimes be very disillusioning. If you think that politics is all about policy and is all about crafting laws and policies and making fine speeches in Parliament, then, of course, getting elected from a Lok Sabha constituency and dealing with the real demands of most of your constituents can be even soul-destroying. But if you accept that that's the price that you have to pay, the admission ticket, as it were, the price of admission to politics, and that the other 5% of the people who come with real issues, developmental issues, urban development issues, if you are representing a city, serious problems of transportation, of port development, of electricity, of railways, which can, if you can do the right thing, affect the lives of lakhs of people. That gives you satisfaction that perhaps other professions don't quite so easily do.
So talking about other countries and the politicians in other countries, since you have traveled across many countries, and as a politician, what difference you see between politics and politicians in India and other countries?
I've already answered that when I talked about the Western democracies, where their attitude to politicians and our attitude to politicians, so let me not repeat myself.
So where do we lag and where do we lead in that sense?
Well, I think our politics is changing. So, I mean, we lag in the sense that the middle class has abandoned the world of politics. And I believe that's an abdication of responsibility. I think that, I remember when Clinton first named his cabinet, he said, my cabinet must look like America. And I would say similarly that our parliament, our political class must look like India. Yes, it must have some grassroots representatives who don't have much of an education, who can only speak their local language, but who are connected to the people there. It may even have some dakus and the dacoits who are also part of our landscape. But it should have people it doesn't have, like the educated urban middle-class professional, who's also part of the Indian landscape and frankly is a growing part of the Indian landscape. But this community is largely not there. One change that is interesting is that we talked about dynasts earlier. The fact is that some of these sons of old-fashioned politicians and daughters of old-fashioned politicians have come into politics and got elected because of who their fathers were. But they are very different from their fathers. They're no longer rustic grassroots types who won because of feudal or caste or other such considerations. Many of them have got good college degrees. They've gone abroad. They've studied in the West. They've got management degrees in some cases. I think Sachin Pilot went to Wharton, if I'm not mistaken. There are a couple of bright young politicians who are sons of politicians, who came in because they're sons of politicians, but who have the kind of qualifications you have or you're working to have, and who therefore bring your kind of sensibility into their work in politics. So in that sense, our political class is already changing from within. And as our middle class grows, the electorate starts demanding more. Soon all of India will be making demands of its politicians the way the Kerala voters do. But also equally, it also means they'll be electing more and more people like them. So more of the voters are people like you, more of the candidates will be people like you and them, and more of you will come into politics. I think our politics is changing. I don't want to speak in terms of lagging or moving forward, but that change is what I think is important.
And when it comes to elections, we have party ideologies, and the government formation, and the governance support. So different parties have different conflicts in terms of interest. So, sir, do you think at a point in time they put parties' brand and parties' the vote share as there's a they prioritize that than the need for the people or the benefit of the people?
Yeah, except that, you have to be responsive to the people. After all, why would somebody vote for you? They vote for you because they think it's in their interest to vote for you or your party. And in the parliamentary system, very often it is the party that people are voting for, because the party represents a certain set of values, a certain set of policies and approaches. So if you don't actually either deliver or speak for the kinds of things they want, why should they vote for you? So my own view is that I do genuinely believe that as far as the Indian voter is concerned, you shouldn't underestimate the voter. I spoke about the self-interest of the Indian voter, and that self-interest also governs their voting.
So, but practically, is that happening, sir? In the day-to-day life, do they really put?
Absolutely. I mean, why do you think so many parties are in favor of benefits for the poor, for example? Because every one of us represents an electoral constituency where 70-odd% of the voters lives on less than $2 a day, the usual yardstick the World Bank and the UN used to use for not absolute poverty, which is $1.25 a day, but for poverty in the general sense. And that $2 a day actually excludes 70% of the Indian population. So how can you not show sensitivity to the poor? They're your majority of your voters. If you go and only talk about things that appeal to the rich, you won't get re-elected again. So these are amongst the opportunities and challenges. I've addressed some of this in my new book, India Shastra, which is out and available. I think some copies available here too, right? So if any of you wants to pick it up. But broadly speaking, some of the things we've talked about are things that have occupied my mind for some time. You've seen them in some of my writings, some of my books. I believe that our country should not underestimate the value of democracy for its own transformation. The India that I left in 1975 and the India I came back to in 2008, truly unrecognizable. Everything in many ways has changed. I talked about opportunities, I talked about brands and products and what's visible, but everything else, I mean, caste relations have changed beyond recognition. Politics has changed beyond recognition with the advent of coalition governance and now the advent of the BJP rule. Society, economics, there's almost nothing in India that reflects the timeless, unchanging land of Western cliché. We have transformed ourselves. And I think that's something that will augur well for all of you as well, as you move into a country of change. Whenever I'm confronted with people, especially in Western audiences with this cliché, I tell them about a photograph that went around the internet during the last Kumbh Mela. It was a photograph of a naked sadhu, right out of central casting. The guy was bare torso, Rudraksha mala around his neck, scraggly hair, gaps in his rotten teeth, warts on his face. This naked sadhu in this photograph looks like an absolute cliched picture of timeless otherworldliness. But in the photograph, the sadhu is chatting away on a mobile phone. That is the Indian reality. It's the old and the new coexisting. It's the paradox of change happening in ways that you can't help notice if you only are attentive to it.
One last question. Now that we are in Gujarat, so this is about the present Prime Minister. So what is your comment about the progress of our nation under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Do you think the schemes like Swachh Bharat or Make in India is really impactful and will make a difference in the ground level?
Well, as I've said in India Shastra, and I'm sorry to keep plugging my book, but I do have to do that. The book was launched only yesterday. So I have to plug it. Mr. Modi is very, very good at the speeches, the rhetoric, the sound bites. And almost, literally there's nothing he said that I can disagree with. If you read my books for the last 25 years, you might almost be forgiven for thinking that Mr. Modi's scriptwriter has read them too. Because there's no real difference in what he articulates as a vision for the future of India, the aspirations of all of you, than what a liberal like myself has been advocating. But there are two problems. The first problem is that these pronouncements appeared to be completely disconnected from any budget, any tangible action plan, any executing authority or implementation. You mentioned Swachh Bharat. You know, I accepted the challenge to participate in it. The Prime Minister is asking me, I'm a citizen of my country. My Prime Minister has made a request. Of course I should do it. And it's a national objective that Mahatma Gandhi had stood for. My own party has stood for. And I said we should do it. But when I've done it, I also wrote to Mr. Modi saying, but what about the follow-up? Okay, so in my particular constituency, I cleaned up a beach and I involved the local stakeholders. And I said, look, I'm giving you a biogas plant so that in future the people don't have to dump their garbage on the beach, they can dump it in the biogas plant instead. But where are the kinds of long-lasting solutions that I've had, number one? Number two, for the bigger, more ambitious things requiring serious infrastructure support from the central government and so on, where is that coming from? So the lack of this, Swachh Bharat has no budget. There is simply no budgetary provision. He announces this model village scheme. Every MP is asked to adopt a model village. We all said, fine, we'd love to do that. Where's the budget? No budget. It's all existing government schemes from the UPA days. So my problem is, these labels are fine, but what we've got is a name-changing government rather than a game-changing government. So that is the first problem, and I accept that 8 months is a very short time. But unless we actually see results on the ground, my skepticism would only grow. The second issue is that there is a fundamental contradiction at the heart of Mr. Modi's governance. That he has articulated, as I said, a certain vision, particularly of economic change and transformation of this country. But to fulfill that vision, he is dependent on the political support of people who are the antithesis of that vision. So you articulate liberal policies and objectives. You talk about more foreign direct investment and opening up the economy and privileging growth and so on. But to win every state election, and in our system, as you know, you have elections every few months. Since Mr. Modi came to power, he's had elections in Maharashtra and Haryana once, then he had Jammu and Kashmir and Jharkhand, now he has Delhi coming up. So with one thing after another, who does he need to win those elections? The very sort of RSS, VHP type stormtroopers who will go out and polarize the votes and deliver the hate speeches and stir up the Hindutva brigades in order to get him the support. And the result is what? That the other objective gets undermined. First of all, you get the backs up of all those who don't share this agenda, so they try and block your other work. As you know, the Rajya Sabha has been paralyzed by parties protesting this kind of thing, Ghar Wapasi and conversion and the whole nation is Hindu and all of this stuff. But also foreigners. You're talking about FDI. I have written an article a couple of weeks ago quoting a letter received from a European investor who had a $250 million investment to bring in and who was willing to have his name quoted, saying, I am a German, I'm reading in my German papers about churches being burned and India becoming a Hindu nation. Why should I bring my money to India? There's so many other places competing for the same money. Why would Arab Muslims who have tremendous investable surpluses come to an India where Muslims are made to feel unwelcome? So it becomes extremely important for Mr. Modi's own objectives that he get these people who are undermining his objectives to stop their excesses. But the problem is, the fundamental contradiction is he needs them to win elections. So it actually means that he has chosen the wrong vehicle. It's difficult to ride a liberal set of policies on the backs of people who are fundamentally illiberal. I mean, you read the RSS's views on everything, on caste, on religion, on gender, on what's appropriate for girls to wear or go out. You name any issue. Their views are profoundly illiberal. And you're not going to be able to pursue them. They're even against foreign investment. They've talked about, the RSS element, the Swadeshi Jagrana Manch elements, all of these people, they're not there to facilitate the kind of liberal economic agenda Mr. Modi talks about. So how does he fulfill these objectives with these means? So these are my fundamental concerns. I will start off by stressing, or rather I will end, by stressing that 8 months is a short time. And when I wrote the book, I wrote 200 days because that's when I finished the manuscript and sent it off. But the fact is that these are what he needs to fix if he's going to win over the skeptics in the educated middle class in this country, because I'm sure that all of us want him to succeed. I've said privately to many friends, look, if Mr. Modi succeeds and India gets better, I'm an Indian, I'm happy. If Mr. Modi fails, I'm a congressman, I'm happy. So I win either way. That's true of all of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir. So we kindly request you to sign few of your books. So before that, small token of appreciation on behalf of our college, I request the Dean sir to give a small memento to Dr. Shashi Tharoor.